The conference room was too bright, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. I sat at the long table, coffee mug in hand, waiting for Mark to explain why he had called this sudden meeting. "Team, I want to introduce someone special," Mark announced, his voice carrying that fake enthusiasm he used for clients. "This is Kayla, and she's going to be joining our department." My stomach dropped as a young woman with perfect blonde hair stepped forward, beaming with nervous excitement. She looked fresh out of college, eager and polished in a way that made me feel ancient at 35. "Kayla will be taking over Allison's responsibilities," Mark continued, and the words hit me like a physical blow. 10 years. 10 years of loyalty, of staying late, of building systems that kept this place running. 10 years of dedication, and this was how it ended. Not with a conversation, not with warning, just a public announcement that my replacement was standing right there. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "My replacement?" Mark's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Around the table, my coworkers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. The room fell silent except for the humming lights above. The silence stretched for what felt like hours before someone started clapping. Then everyone joined in, that awkward corporate applause that sounds more like obligation than celebration. Kayla's face lit up with genuine pleasure. She was probably thinking this was the best day of her life, getting her first real job at a respected company. She had no idea she was stepping into a position built on someone else's destruction. "Allison has been such a valuable team member," Mark continued, his tone suggesting past tense. "We're lucky she'll have a few weeks to train Kayla before her transition." My hand tightened around my coffee mug until my knuckles went white. Transition. Like I was a piece of equipment being phased out, not a person who had poured a decade of her life into this company. "I'm so excited to learn from you," Kayla said, turning to me with bright, trusting eyes. "Mark says you're the best at what you do." "What I did." Past tense again. I forced my face into something resembling a smile. "Of course. Happy to help." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Mark caught my eye and leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. "Be a team player, Allison." I kept that professional smile plastered on my face even as everything inside me crumbled. 20 people were watching, waiting to see how I would react to being publicly replaced without warning. "Of course," I repeated, louder this time. "I'll make sure Kayla has everything she needs." The relief in Mark's expression was obvious. He had been worried I might make a scene, might question his decision in front of the team. Instead, I was playing the role he wanted, the gracious veteran stepping aside for fresh talent. "Wonderful," he said. "I knew we could count on your professionalism." The meeting continued with discussions about quarterly goals and client updates, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. 10 years of excellent performance reviews. 10 years of exceeding targets and fixing problems other people created. 10 years of being told I was indispensable. And now I was being disposed of like yesterday's newspaper. Kayla kept glancing at me with eager anticipation, probably planning all the questions she would ask during our training sessions. She seemed nice enough, which somehow made everything worse. This wasn't her fault. She was just a young woman trying to start her career. But as I looked around the table at my coworkers' carefully neutral faces, one thought crystallized in my mind: not anymore. I made it through the rest of the workday on autopilot, answering emails and attending meetings like nothing had changed. But when 5 o'clock came, I practically ran to my car. Sitting in the parking garage, I gripped the steering wheel and tried to process what had happened. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, making the concrete walls look like a prison. "I gave this place everything," I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. Everything. My 20s, most of my 30s. I had missed family dinners for client emergencies. I had worked weekends and holidays. I had built systems from scratch that saved the company thousands of dollars every month. And for what? To be replaced by someone young enough to be my little sister? My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "How was work, honey?" I stared at the message for a long moment. How was I going to explain this? How was I going to tell my family that despite doing everything right, I was being thrown away like garbage? The tears I had been holding back all day finally came, hot and angry against my cheeks. But underneath the hurt and humiliation, something else was growing. Something cold and calculating. They wanted me to train my replacement? Fine. I would train her. Just not the way they expected. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. Kayla was already there, fumbling through her new email account with the concentrated focus of someone trying to make a good impression. I watched her from my desk, taking mental notes. She was methodical but slow, reading every email twice before responding. She took detailed notes on everything, even simple instructions. "Good morning," I said, approaching her cubicle with a cup of coffee and what I hoped looked like a genuine smile. "Oh, Allison. I'm so glad you're here." Kayla looked up with relief. "I'm trying to understand the client database, but it's more complex than I expected." Of course it was. I had built that database myself over 3 years, layering in shortcuts and connections that made sense to me but would be invisible to anyone else. "It takes time to learn the logic," I said kindly. "Why don't I walk you through the basics?" For the next hour, I showed Kayla the surface level of the system. How to log in, how to search for clients, how to generate basic reports. All the simple stuff that would make her feel confident. I carefully avoided mentioning the master spreadsheet that controlled everything else. Or the custom macros that automated half the processes. Or the backup files that contained the real client history. "You'll be fine," I told her as we wrapped up the session. But my eyes were already planning her downfall. Later that morning, I was refilling my coffee when I overheard Mark talking to another manager near the break room. "The Kayla situation is perfect timing," he was saying, his voice full of self-satisfaction. "We'll save at least $40,000 a year with the switch." Allison's salary was getting too high for what she does. I froze, coffee pot in hand. $40,000. That's what my 10 years of loyalty was worth to them, a line item in a budget spreadsheet. "Plus, younger employees are more adaptable," Mark continued. "Less set in their ways. Kayla will be much easier to manage." I poured my coffee very slowly, letting their words wash over me. They weren't just replacing me, they were celebrating it. Bragging about how clever they were to get rid of an expensive, experienced employee. Walking back to my desk, I passed Mark in the hallway. He gave me his usual fake smile. "How's the training going?" he asked. "Very well," I replied sweetly. "Kayla's a quick learner." "Great to hear. I knew you'd handle this transition professionally." I smiled back at him. "I always finish what I start." As I settled back at my desk, I whispered under my breath, "Then I'll make every dollar count." Time to show them exactly what $40,000 worth of experience looked like. I spent the rest of the week conducting training sessions with Kayla. To anyone watching, I was being the perfect mentor, patient, thorough, and encouraging. But every lesson I taught included hidden complexity. I showed her how to run monthly reports, but didn't mention that the data needed to be cross-referenced with 3 other systems. I explained the client communication protocols, but skipped the informal relationships that made everything work smoothly. "It's easy once you know the logic," I told her, demonstrating how to update client records. What I didn't tell her was that the logic depended on understanding 10 years of accumulated workarounds and exceptions. Every process I had streamlined over the years was built on layers of institutional knowledge that couldn't be transferred in a few training sessions. Kayla took notes frantically, trying to capture everything. But you can't document experience. You can't write down the way Mrs. Johnson from Peterson Industries always called on Fridays when she was stressed, or how the manufacturing clients needed their reports formatted differently than the retail ones. "You're such a good teacher," Kayla said after one particularly detailed session. "This all makes perfect sense." I smiled and patted her shoulder. Just remember, don't change anything until you're completely comfortable with how it all works together. She nodded eagerly, completely missing the warning in my tone. Over the weekend, I came into the office unofficially. The building was empty, security cameras were my only witnesses as I made subtle but crucial changes to the systems I had built. I edited key formulas in the master spreadsheet, making them dependent on macros that only existed on my computer. I moved critical reference files to folders with names that looked like outdated archives. I changed passwords on automation tools and didn't update the documentation. Everything would still work perfectly as long as I was there to maintain it. The beauty of my trap was its invisibility. To anyone looking at the surface, all the systems appeared normal. Kayla could run reports, send emails, and manage daily tasks without any problems. But the moment something went wrong, the moment she tried to troubleshoot or make changes, she would discover that everything was held together by knowledge that only existed in my head. Monday morning, I continued the training sessions as if nothing had changed. The important thing is not to modify any of the core processes, I told Kayla as we reviewed the reporting system. These formulas are very delicate. Just don't change anything, and you'll be fine. She nodded seriously, making another note in her already thick notebook. I understand. Stick to the procedures exactly as you've shown me. Perfect. Mark stopped by my desk on Tuesday afternoon, wearing his most magnanimous expression. Allison, I have to say, you're handling this transition with such grace. I'm really impressed with your professionalism. I looked up from my computer, giving him my best team player smile. Thank you, Mark. I believe in doing things the right way. That's exactly the attitude I hoped for. You're really setting a great example for the team. I always finish what I start, I replied. It's important to me that Kayla succeeds. What I didn't tell him was that I had just finished setting up the final piece of my strategy. While we talked, I had queued up an email template for Kayla to use with our biggest client, a template with a subtle but critical error in the contact information. Keep up the excellent work, Mark said, patting my shoulder in that condescending way he had perfected. 20 minutes later, my computer chimed with a calendar notification. Kayla was scheduled to send her first major client update this afternoon. I watched from across the office as she opened her email, selected the template I had prepared, and began typing her message. She was so focused on getting the tone right that she didn't notice she was sending it to the wrong department. The mistake wouldn't cause permanent damage, but it would create enough confusion to make her look unprepared. My phone buzzed 30 minutes later with a confused email from the client, asking why they had received a report meant for someone else. The client confusion escalated quickly. By the end of the day, there were 3 people trying to figure out why Peterson Industries had received Hartwell Manufacturing's quarterly analysis. Mark stormed over to my desk, his face red with frustration. What happened with the Peterson account? They're saying they got the wrong report. I'm not sure, I said, maintaining perfect innocence. Let me check with Kayla. We walked over to Kayla's cubicle, where she was frantically trying to understand what had gone wrong. I used the template exactly like you showed me, she said, looking close to tears. I don't understand how this happened. Mark's jaw tightened. Allison, you're supposed to be guiding her through these processes. How did she make such a basic mistake? I'm sorry, I said, my voice full of concern. I thought I had explained the client categories clearly. This is obviously my fault for not being thorough enough. Fix it, Mark snapped. And make sure it doesn't happen again. After he stalked away, I turned to Kayla with what I hoped looked like maternal sympathy. Don't worry about Mark, I said gently. He's under a lot of pressure. We'll just double-check everything from now on. That evening, I stayed late to update my master folder, a comprehensive backup of every process, every workaround, every institutional detail that kept our department running smoothly. Knowledge that would be leaving with me in a few days. By the middle of my second week of training, I noticed the shift in how my coworkers treated me. Conversations stopped when I approached. People avoided making eye contact. I was already a ghost in their minds, someone who was leaving and therefore no longer relevant. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. These were people I had worked with for years, people whose mistakes I had covered, whose successes I had helped create. Now they treated me like an embarrassing relative at a family reunion. Only Kayla still sought me out, asking questions and requesting guidance. Her eagerness was genuine, which made me feel almost guilty about what I was planning. Almost. "I'm really grateful for all your help," she told me during one of our training sessions. "I know this transition must be difficult for you." I looked at her young, hopeful face and felt a stab of something that might have been conscience. "Change is always challenging," I replied carefully. "But I want you to succeed here." That part was true. I did want her to succeed eventually. After she learned some hard lessons about loyalty and corporate reality. As I watched her diligently taking notes, I thought, they'll miss me before they even realize it. The systems I had built were like an iceberg, 90% invisible beneath the surface. Kayla was learning to navigate the tip, but she had no idea about the massive complexity underneath. Friday morning, Mark called me into the HR office for our final meeting. The room smelled like industrial carpet and broken dreams. "So, your last day will be next Friday," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Standard exit paperwork, final paycheck calculations, the usual stuff." I nodded calmly as if we were discussing lunch plans. "Of course. The transition with Kayla seems to be going smoothly. She speaks very highly of your training. She's a bright young woman. I'm confident she'll do well." Mark seemed pleased by my cooperative attitude. He had probably been expecting drama, tears, or at least some passive-aggressive pushback. "I want you to know this decision wasn't personal, Allison. It's just business. Sometimes companies need to make tough choices." "I understand completely," I replied, my voice steady. "Can I continue helping Kayla through the rest of the week? I want to make sure she has everything she needs." "That would be great," Mark said, relief evident in his voice. "Really appreciate your professionalism about this whole situation." I signed the exit papers with a steady hand, each signature feeling like a small act of rebellion. They thought they were getting rid of me quietly, without complications. They had no idea what complications looked like. My final week was a masterpiece of calculated cooperation. I spent hours with Kayla, walking her through every visible aspect of my job. I transferred files, explained procedures, and answered her endless questions with patient detail. "Everything you need is right here," I told her, handing over a comprehensive folder of documentation, procedures, and contact lists. What I didn't mention was the master project library, a hidden archive that contained the real backbone of everything I had built. Without access to those files, the elegant systems I had created would slowly degrade into chaos. The master library wasn't on any shared drive. It lived on my personal computer, protected by passwords and organized according to logic that made sense only to me. Kayla flipped through the folder I had given her, nodding with satisfaction. "This is incredibly thorough. Thank you so much. I want you to have everything you need to succeed," I said, and meant it. She would have everything she needed eventually. After she learned that success couldn't be handed over in a folder. I spent my last few days quietly removing my personal automation tools, changing passwords to systems I had built, and ensuring that the institutional knowledge in my head would leave with me. It wasn't sabotage, exactly. I was just taking back what belonged to me. They threw me a goodbye party on my last day. Cupcakes from the grocery store, a generic card signed by people who had barely spoken to me in weeks, and speeches about my valuable contributions. Mark raised his coffee mug in a toast. "We couldn't have done it without Allison. She's been the backbone of this department for 10 years. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Yes, I had been the backbone. And now they were about to find out what happens when you remove someone's spine. To new beginnings, Mark continued, and everyone raised their cups in response. You'll see just how true that is, I thought, smiling and nodding along with the rest of them. Kayla stood beside me, looking emotional about my departure. "I'm going to miss having you here," she said quietly. "You'll be fine," I assured her. "You have good instincts." The party felt like a wake for someone who wasn't actually dead. Everyone was polite and slightly uncomfortable, going through the motions of appreciation while clearly eager to move on. After 30 minutes of forced celebration, people began drifting back to their desks. The show was over. I looked around the office one last time, memorizing the faces of people who had watched me get discarded without saying a word. Tomorrow, they would start learning the real value of experience. I walked out of the building for the last time carrying a small cardboard box with my personal items. 10 years of my life reduced to a coffee mug, a desk plant, and a few framed photos. The security guard nodded politely as I turned in my badge. "Good luck, Ms. Allison." "Thank you," I replied. "I have a feeling everything will work out exactly as it should." Behind me, I heard running footsteps. Kayla had followed me to the elevator. "Wish me luck," she called out, her voice bright with nervous energy. I turned to look at her one last time, young, eager, completely unprepared for what was coming. I didn't turn around to respond. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. In my car, I sat for a moment in the parking garage where this had all started. 2 weeks ago, I had broken down in this same spot, devastated by betrayal. Now I felt only quiet satisfaction. They had forced me to train my replacement. Mission accomplished. The real education was about to begin. I drove away without looking back, already planning my next move. Mark thought he had saved the company $40,000 by replacing me. He was about to discover that some savings are more expensive than he could imagine. 2 weeks into my unemployment, I was drinking coffee and reading job listings when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my old office number. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Then again. The fourth call was from Mark's direct line. I watched it ring until it stopped, then checked my email. "Quick question about the Peterson account, Mark." Then another email marked urgent, need info on client database. Then a third, please call ASAP, system issues. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. When I returned an hour later, there were 6 missed calls and 12 increasingly frantic emails. The chaos had begun. According to my former colleagues who were texting me updates, Kayla was having a meltdown. A client report had corrupted when she tried to modify it. Several automated processes had stopped working. The database was returning error messages that no one understood. Everything was falling apart exactly as I had planned. My phone rang again. This time it was Mark calling from his personal cell phone. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Mark." "Allison, thank God. We're having some technical issues and need your help." "I'm afraid I no longer work there," I replied pleasantly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "I know you don't work here anymore," Mark said finally, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "But you built these systems. You're the only one who understands how they work." "I documented everything thoroughly for Kayla," I replied. "She should have everything she needs." "The documentation doesn't cover this. There are error messages we've never seen before." "That's strange. Everything was working fine when I left." Another pause. I could practically hear Mark grinding his teeth. "Look, I know the situation was difficult, but we really need your help. Just a quick consultation to get us back on track." "I appreciate the call, Mark, but I'm focusing on new opportunities now. I'm sure your team can figure it out." "Allison, please. The client reports are due Monday, and nothing is working properly." I let the desperation in his voice wash over me for a moment before responding. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" I asked sweetly. Then I hung up. Over the next 3 days, the situation at my former workplace deteriorated rapidly. The systems I had built were like a house of cards, remove the right pieces, and everything collapsed. They had wanted to save $40,000 by replacing me. Time to show them what $40,000 of expertise was really worth. The domino effect was beautiful to watch from the outside. My former coworkers kept me updated through a combination of gossip and genuine panic. The simple systems I had built were revealing their true complexity under Kayla's inexperienced management. Processes that had run smoothly for years were failing in spectacular ways. Client reports contained incorrect data because Kayla didn't understand the cross-referencing requirements. Automated emails were going to the wrong recipients because she had modified a template without understanding its dependencies. The customer database crashed completely when she tried to run a query that exceeded its undocumented limits. Within a week, 3 major clients had complained about service quality. One demanded a meeting with senior management to discuss their concerns. Kayla was working 16-hour days trying to keep up, but she was drowning. The job that had seemed manageable during our training sessions had revealed itself to be far more complex than anyone realized. Mark was fielding angry calls from clients and increasingly desperate emails from his own management. The department that had run smoothly for years was suddenly a source of constant problems. According to my sources, he spent most of his time trying to fix issues he didn't understand, shouting at people who couldn't help him, and desperately searching through old emails for solutions. The beautiful irony was that all the answers existed in my master project library, the one I had taken with me. The breaking point came 3 weeks after my departure. According to my friend Jessica, who still worked in accounting, one of the senior executives had started digging through old files trying to understand why everything had gone wrong so quickly. What he found was a trail of documentation that told the real story. Every system improvement, every process optimization, every efficiency gain from the past 5 years had my name on it. Timestamps showing when I had created solutions, email threads proving I had identified problems and fixed them independently. Wait, the CEO had said during an emergency meeting, she built this entire structure? The executive team was finally realizing what they had lost. I wasn't just an employee who processed reports, I was the person who had designed and maintained the entire operational framework of the department. Mark had tried to downplay my contributions, claiming that the recent problems were just growing pains from the transition. But the evidence was overwhelming. One particularly damning email thread showed Mark taking credit for a cost-saving initiative that had saved the company $200,000, an initiative I had proposed, researched, and implemented entirely on my own. The CEO was reportedly furious about the mismanagement of my departure. That's when my phone rang with a call from the executive suite. Ms. Allison? This is CEO Franklin. I was wondering if you might be available to discuss a consulting opportunity. I smiled, looking out my apartment window at the city skyline. At my current rate? I'd be happy to discuss it. The consulting rate I quoted was exactly 5 times my old hourly wage. If they wanted to buy back my expertise, they were going to pay premium prices for it. CEO Franklin didn't hesitate. That's acceptable. How soon can you start? I could be there Monday morning, I replied, keeping my voice professional despite the satisfaction blooming in my chest. Excellent. We'll have a consultant agreement ready for your signature. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment for a moment, processing what had just happened. 3 weeks ago, they had thrown me away like garbage. Now they were begging me to come back at 5 times my old rate. The weekend passed slowly. I spent Saturday shopping for a new outfit, something that said expensive consultant rather than grateful employee. I wanted to look the part when I walked back into that building. Sunday evening, I received an email with my consulting contract. The terms were even better than I had expected: premium hourly rate, expense account, and complete autonomy over how I solved their problems. I signed the contract and sent it back with a note, looking forward to helping resolve your technical difficulties. Monday morning, I stood outside the building where I had worked for 10 years, but everything felt different. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a highly paid expert coming to fix their mistakes. Time to make my entrance. Walking into the building as a consultant felt like returning as royalty. The security guard did a double take when he saw me, then scrambled to process my visitor's badge. "Welcome back, Ms. Allison," he said nervously. People stared as I walked through the office. Some looked confused, others embarrassed. Everyone seemed to understand that my return meant they had made a terrible mistake. I was escorted to a conference room where CEO Franklin waited with the executive team. The same room where I had been humiliated a month ago was now hosting my triumphant return. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice," Franklin said, shaking my hand respectfully. "We're experiencing some significant operational challenges." "I'm here to help," I replied professionally. For my temporary office, they gave me Mark's space. He was conspicuously absent from the building, reportedly taking some time to reassess departmental strategies. I spent the first day conducting a thorough assessment of the damage. Everything was exactly as broken as I had expected. The beautiful systems I had built were limping along like wounded animals. Kayla approached my desk late in the afternoon, looking exhausted and defeated. "I'm so glad you're here," she said quietly. "I've been struggling with everything. Nothing works the way you showed me." "Systems can be tricky," I replied kindly. "Don't worry. We'll get everything sorted out." The irony was perfect. I was being paid consultant rates to fix problems I had created. Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of restoring one of the corrupted databases when raised voices erupted from the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Mark gesturing wildly while CEO Franklin listened with a stone-faced expression. I wasn't trained for this. The voice was Kayla's, high-pitched and desperate. I paused my work to listen more carefully. "She set me up to fail," Kayla continued. "The systems were deliberately designed to break without her knowledge." Mark's voice rose to match hers. "That's exactly what I've been saying. This is sabotage, pure and simple." "Enough," Franklin's voice cut through the arguing like a blade. The conference room fell silent. "Mark, I've been reviewing your email communications over the past 6 months. Would you care to explain why you described Allison as dead weight that needed to be eliminated?" Even through the glass, I could see Mark's face go pale. "That was taken out of context," he stammered. "Was it also out of context when you told the board that anyone could do her job for half the salary?" Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Franklin's voice remained deadly calm. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out." 10 minutes later, I watched Mark walk past my desk carrying a cardboard box, his face flushed with humiliation. He didn't look at me. The next morning, CEO Franklin called me into his office for a private meeting. The corner office was impressive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive furniture, and awards covering one wall. "I want to apologize," Franklin said without preamble. "Mark misrepresented your value to this company, and his decision to replace you was unauthorized." I nodded politely. "These things happen." "No, they don't. Not at well-managed companies." Franklin pulled out a folder. "I've been reviewing your personnel file and your contributions over the past decade. The scope of your work was significantly understated." He slid a document across his desk. "I'd like to offer you your old position back, with a significant adjustment to reflect your actual value." I looked at the offer. Double my old salary, full benefits, and complete autonomy over departmental operations. A month ago, this would have felt like vindication. Now it felt like too little, too late. "That's very generous," I said carefully. "You deserve it. The company made a serious error in judgment." I looked out his window at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there were companies that would value my expertise from the beginning, that wouldn't need to learn my worth through crisis. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Franklin. But I think I've outgrown this place." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "May I ask what you mean?" "I've learned that my skills are more valuable than I realized. And I've learned that loyalty is a two-way street." I stood up and shook his hand. "Thank you for the consulting opportunity. My final report will be ready by tomorrow." My final report was a masterpiece of professional documentation. 20 pages detailing every system failure, every process breakdown, and every piece of institutional knowledge that had walked out the door with me. I recommended hiring 2 people to replace what I had been doing alone. I suggested comprehensive documentation requirements for all future system changes. I provided a roadmap for rebuilding the operational stability they had carelessly destroyed. The report was thorough, professional, and diplomatically worded. It didn't need to be vindictive, the facts spoke for themselves. I submitted it along with my final consulting invoice. The total amount for 3 weeks of work was more than I had made in 6 months as their employee. That afternoon, I cleaned out the temporary office and prepared to leave for the second time. As I walked toward the exit, I passed Kayla at her desk. She looked up with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for fixing everything," she said. "I've learned so much from watching you work." "You'll do fine," I told her. "Just remember, systems are only as good as the people who understand them." Outside the building, I paused to look back one more time. A month ago, I had walked out of that place feeling destroyed. Now I was leaving as a recognized expert, with multiple job offers and a consulting business that was already generating interest. They had forced me to train my replacement. I had given them exactly what they asked for. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Morrison & Associates, a consulting firm that specialized in operational efficiency. The walls were decorated with certificates from grateful clients and a framed copy of my first published article on systems management. My assistant knocked on the door. "Your 2 o'clock appointment is here." I looked up from my computer to see a familiar name on my calendar. Peterson Industries, the client whose report had been sent to the wrong department during Kayla's first week. The irony was delicious. "Send them in," I said. The Peterson executives entered with warm smiles and eager handshakes. They had been struggling with their new marketing agency and wanted to discuss a comprehensive operational review. "We heard you were the person to call for this kind of analysis," their CEO said. "Your reputation in the industry is impressive." As we discussed their needs, I learned that they had left my old company after a series of service failures. They weren't the only ones, 3 other major clients had made similar moves. "It seemed like they lost their institutional knowledge overnight," one executive explained. "Suddenly, no one understood our account anymore." I took their contract and added it to my growing portfolio. That evening, I updated my LinkedIn profile with news of the Peterson engagement. Within hours, I had received congratulations from dozens of professional contacts and 3 new consultation requests. They had forced me to train my replacement. So I did, just not the way they expected. Some lessons are worth exactly what you pay for them.